Oh my god, after a year and a half, finally getting an Analog Pocket sent to me. And if you don't know, the Analog Pocket is modern hardware, kind of styled in the Game Boy Color form factor, but it's able to emulate multiple different handhelds from back in the day. And I thought it would be kind of cool to just kind of do a trip down memory lane. Specifically today, talking about some of the Nintendo handhelds that I had when I was younger, and talk about also some of the things that I picked up over the years, which were handhelds of Nintendo that I wanted when I was a kid and couldn't afford or couldn't find or couldn't just convince my parents to get me. Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good game plan. It would be cool to hear about y'all's journeys with Nintendo handhelds over the years, or if you had like Game Gears, Nomads, or whatever you had. It'd be cool to hear about handhelds that you had as a kid that just give you fond memories. And if you got an Analog Pocket, it'd be kind of cool to hear about what y'all think about those. But with that said, let's get started. So the first one up here is going to be the thing that started all of the crazy behind me. And that's going to be the OG Game Boy. This is actually my OG Game Boy. Mine came bundled with Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and this is the handheld that just really got me into gaming. When I got this Game Boy, like, this was me time. This is me getting to play video games, and I remember lying in my bed at night playing Game Boy, or attempting to play Game Boy since you couldn't play this thing in the dark. And like trying to find like any light that I could to try to play the Game Boy with. But this was the thing that really got me into gaming, and specifically playing Link's Awakening was the game I think that was like my gateway into being like, I understand now. Other memories that I have with this, like I think I've told this story on this channel before, but I remember like in elementary school, sitting in class, me and my best friend, like he'd be sitting next to me. We would have our books propped up on our desk. We'd have our Game Boys just kind of like sitting inside the books. And we'd just be like playing games. I'd be playing Link's Awakening, like I think for probably like a year or two. Everywhere I went, I was playing Link's Awakening on my Game Boy until my batteries died or until the sun went down. And it was just a good time, just great memories with this thing. And like I said, this was the one that kickstarted all of this nonsense behind me and my love for video games. So the next two up are gonna be, there's one, and then there's two Play It Loud Game Boys. I remember seeing these things just chilling in Walmart glass cases, like I was saying, and just being enamored with it. I don't know if it was just like the cases themselves, or just the fact that these Game Boys came in like multiple different colors. Like there's the yellow one that I have here, the green one, there was a black one, there was a red one. I want to say there was one more primary color, but then there was also a clear one, and like that clear one was the one I always really wanted, if I'm being honest. But yeah, like it was just cool to see these plastic cases, and just always wanted to get one of them. Never did, but one of the first things that I did once I started getting kind of a disposable income was to then go back and find it. And I remember when I bought these Game Boys, I bought these two from the same seller, and I also got some complete box Game Boy games that were in like mint condition at the time from a lady that was selling them off. Like she had collected these herself, and she was selling them off for like a really good price. And I remember she sent like a note telling me how she got these Game Boys, and then the games that I also got with these. And just the fact that these came from somebody who like treated them with love and care was just like a cool thing that I just remember. And like I said, I always wanted to get these Play It Loud Game Boys. The next one up is going to be pretty similar to the Play It Loud Game Boys. This was something that I also really remember seeing in Walmart glass cases when I was a kid, and always really wanting one, and I never got one until I was kind of an adult with some income to throw around. And that's going to be, boom, the Game Boy Pockets. This is another one where I remember seeing these cases inside the glass cases and just being like, oh my god, these things look amazing. This is the only Game Boy Pocket that I have. I never had one when I was a kid. I think the only time that I had a small Game Boy was when I got a Game Boy Color. I think these are probably about the same size. I've actually never compared the size, but I remember wanting one of these because I was like, man, it's so small, it's so slim. How can technology get better than this? And then like I remember seeing like commercials for these on TV and stuff, and they always just seem kind of cool. Next one up, actually going to be the Game Boy Color. So this is my original Game Boy Color from when I was a kid. I remember getting this on Easter one year. My mom surprised me with it. She got me this and one game. That game was Spawn. Spawn game, not great. It's one of 2 Game Boy Color games that I had as a kid. The other one being Dragon Warriors 3. And Dragon Warriors 3 was amazing. I remember just sinking so much time into that game on this thing. And I always just thought this was really cool because you could play original Game Boy games on the Game Boy Color. I do kind of always regret that the Game Boy Color wasn't on par with the Game Gear. Like, I remember watching Surf Ninjas when I was a kid, and then just always being kind of like, I would really like to get a Game Gear, although I don't know what games are on the Game Gear. I wish the Game Boy Color had like launched with backlighting, so you can actually play this thing in the dark, and maybe some better games. Yeah, there's not anything that I would say that was like super memorable for me. I do remember Link's Awakening DX being a thing on the Game Boy Color, but I never got that, never played it, and I just played the OG Link's Awakening and loved it. Next thing up is gonna be my original Game Boy Advance. So this, when I got this Game Boy Advance, this is the leap that I was kind of expecting to see when I had gotten a Game Boy Color. So playing Game Boy Advance games and then comparing those to Game Boy and Game Boy Color blew my mind back in the day. I just remember being like, this is basically a Super Nintendo in your hands. Like, this is crazy. I also had gotten Mario Kart as one of my first Game Boy Advance games. And playing Mario Kart on a Game Boy Advance was just mind-blowing. And then, I think Pokemon was like the next other game on the Game Boy Advance that I played a lot. Like, me and my best friend at that time were both very much into Pokemon. And so, like, we would battle each other and like do a lot of training and stuff. And I just remember lots of the time in like high school, we would be playing Pokemon and Mario Kart. And it was just a good time, like a lot of good memories with that. But my one complaint about the Game Boy Advance was always the screen. Like, it was so easy to scratch the screen. I used to put my Game Boy Advance in a sock and I put that in my backpack to try to protect the screen. And it was just kind of nuts. But Nintendo did fix that with the Game Boy Advance SP. So like, this thing was amazing as well. Like, having the flip screen I thought was genius, because it's like, okay, now I can protect my freaking screen. And it was so much smaller. Like, this thing was super easy to put in a backpack or like put in your pocket and stuff. And this was another one, more so than the other Game Boy Advance. Like, the other Game Boy Advance I would put in my backpack and then take it to school, and then I would play it when I was at home, and that was pretty much it. But when I got the SP, I used to take this thing like everywhere with me. I remember, like, at that point, me and my friends had started driving, and so like we would go to like restaurants together, we'd go see movies, we'd go like to the beach and whatnot. And so like I would always have my Game Boy Advance with me and just kind of like chilling whenever we had downtime or like waiting for things, whatever. And yeah, so I feel like this model of the Game Boy I probably have more attachment to than the OG Game Boy Advance, but the Game Boy Advance in general, I just remember being like this giant leap in technology, being like, you can play Super Nintendo games on the go, it's never gonna get better than this. So my one complaint about the Game Boy Advance SP was mine was not backlit, and I was just like, how many times is Nintendo gonna get this wrong? Like, I want a backlit screen and they're not available. Boom! This is my only loose Game Boy Advance, but it's an AGS 101, so this one does have a backlit screen. And so when I was playing a lot of Game Boy Advance games, and after I got this one, I started using this one a lot, and boom, look at that screen, man. Like, it's just, I always loved flipping this thing up. And yeah, so I always loved the fact that I could play games, like Super Nintendo games on the go. We had a backlit screen finally, and just this thing was always so comfortable for me to hold. The last one here that we have is just like, I have a boxed AGS 101, and this one's actually a Japanese Game Boy Advance SP, and I got this one like, I want to say it was like 7 or 8 years ago, and I actually won this in a late night eBay auction where I was actually trying to get Final Fantasy VI for the Game Boy Advance. So I ended up winning a bundle. It was like Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, all complete in box mint, and this Game Boy Advance SP. AGS 101, and I got it all for like $60. And like, it's just, oh my god, I wish we could go back to the days when game collecting was still pretty niche and like prices weren't insane, but still pretty doable. But whatever, those days are long gone. So that's all of my Game Boys. I was thinking about maybe talking about DS, the 3DS, the 2DS, and like all the different variants of that. Like, I went ham during this time because this is when, that was the time period where I was like coming out of college. I had my first real job. I really had a disposable income, and I spent most of my money on DS and 3DS stuff. And so I have a lot of hardware for like the DS, 2DS, 3DS, and it'd be kind of cool to like talk about this. I say I have a lot. I have probably about the same number of things that I talked about in this video. But anyways, if you stuck it out this long, thank you, I appreciate it. If you liked the video, please like, comment, subscribe. I feel like I want to do more videos kind of like this, just talking about stuff from the collection, and I'd love to hear y'all's history with some of these things too. Like I said, what are your favorite Nintendo handhelds? What are the ones that you got first? What are the models that you always wish that you got but you never did? Just tell me, just throw it all, shotgun it down in the comments. Until we meet again, peace.